I grew up in the steel country in the United States around the Pittsburgh area, and I spent many decades studying the efforts of women steelworkers to carve out women's committees and equity structures so that a male-dominated union could represent their interests. And a part of that was the creation of a women's leadership school called the Women of Steel. And it was a mini women's studies course whose goal was to give women some of the tools they would need to be a minority in a very male-dominated space, to be able to speak up at union meetings, to be able to participate in politics both inside and outside the union. And this was developed by union feminists in the steelworkers in Canada and the US, because the steelworkers represent both Canadian and US steelworkers. It took the women 25 years to get from standing up at a big international convention and presenting a list of 7 demands to getting to a point where they had institutionalized equity structures like Janet was talking about, committees, conferences, newsletters, leadership school, a network of women's committees that spread throughout the US and Canada, so that these equity structures became platforms and staging areas for a more radical politics than you would normally have if you were just focused on your own particular local or state or district. And then, because for the women to be successful, they had to ally themselves, form alliances with and coalitions with community-based social justice activists, particularly for women of color. It was the civil rights movement. For immigrant workers, it's the immigrant rights movement. For women, it was the women's movement. So they had to figure out how to build these kinds of alliances so that they could have a stronger voice inside organized labor. For all the reasons everybody already said, you know, labor, particularly in manufacturing, was the preserve of men. I professionally, I probably will claim the label of a feminist killjoy. And if you're familiar with Sarah Ahmed's work, who's an Adelaide girl, okay, and a women's studies professor who recently resigned from her position at Goldsmiths because her university would not respond appropriately to claims of sexual harassment by students. But Sarah says the feminist killjoy is that person who comes into the room and notices that sex discrimination is happening, okay, and everybody else rolls their eyes. Well, I've done that for 40 years. And being a feminist killjoy can be wearing and taxing and difficult work. I was, for the first 12 years of my academic career, I was actually on the professional staff because there were no tenure lines in women's studies. We're talking about the 70s and the 80s. So I go into the university as a professional staff to help create programs and activities and events around women's studies. So I've been a part of institutionalizing women's studies in 2 big research universities, Ohio State University and Arizona State University. And again, always coming up what Sarah calls the brick wall. Everybody knows there's diversity, that there's a need for diversity, that there are obstacles to implementing diversity in universities or in labor unions. But there is less willingness to change any of the power relations or the structures that have produced the barriers to organizing and to representing your rights. So the brick wall is, you know, after a while, you keep running against these brick walls. You either lose interest or you want to protect yourself from any more hurt or disrespect. So when I went to Arizona State University, after I got tenure based on writing about women steelworkers. That was the book that I wrote in 2000, and it was published in 2003. And I gave my first talk here in Adelaide about the book to a WMDOI conference where I was the dinner speaker, and we talked about it with the women steelworkers and all the women in male-dominated unions. So I learned a lot about feminist tenacity from the feminists in the Steelworkers Union. Okay, so these women had very tough experiences on the job, very tough experiences in their union, and they persisted Okay, persistence is a word now that's carrying much cachet after basically the U.S. Senate told Elizabeth Warren to shut up and sit down. And yet she persisted in being a feminist killjoy. Okay, so it's like there are repercussions. And I just want to reinforce how difficult the moment is right now in both Australia and in the U.S. Universities are under assault by the neoliberal agenda and by the rise of populism. The first week after Donald Trump was elected, a state senator in Arizona tried to introduce a bill that would outlaw universities from teaching courses on race, class, gender, or social justice. Okay, so women's studies at Arizona State University is 40 years old. It teaches 6,000 students a year. It has an MA, a PhD, an undergraduate degree. It's in the School of Social Transformation, where their partners are African and African American Studies, Asian Pacific American Studies, the Center for Indian Education, and Justice Studies. So we have faculty and students. We teach 12,000 students a year. We have 1,000 of them pursuing degrees or certificates. Some of our certificates are in human rights, they're in economic justice, they're in disability studies, in addition to having degrees in all of these fields. So together we're a lot stronger than if we were apart. But forming that school, even with all these progressives, with commitments and passions for justice and equality, proved to be very challenging, because not everybody is situated in the university in the same way. So power circulates in the university. Tenure-track faculty have more power than casuals. Professional staff have less power than tenure-track faculty, okay? And certain disciplines have more power than other disciplines. So to pretend that we're all women without these intersecting other power dimensions that situate us in every circumstances differently is a challenge. So we have to form a certain amount of unity to achieve goals and objectives, but at the same time we have to recognize that these are deep and painful divisions. Now what's happening in the US, both the right and the left are blaming feminists and women and black activists for identity politics. Like identity politics caused the neoliberal agenda in higher education. Feminists, are responsible for the problems of coal miners because the Democratic Party listened to feminists instead of to white industrial workers, okay? As though none of us have these competing. I came from this steel producing region. My grandfather was a Greek immigrant. He worked in steel mills. My uncle worked in a steel mill. My other uncle was a railroad worker who was a strong unionist, okay? So we go, all of a sudden, academic liberals are being blamed for the problems that led to the election of Donald Trump. Well, my issue is I want to be responsible for unelecting him. Okay, so okay, I have looked at every analysis, believe me, about why he won. And it is a very narrow vote, which suggests, as Jana points out, organizing will be effective because we can undo a lot of the damage very quickly if we're organized. So how is labor going to ally with the women's movement, with the Black Lives Matter, with Standing Rock? Okay, we're going to have to find ways to do our own thing and ways to come together because we have expertise in different areas. And labor has always been interesting to me because it is a united front movement. Okay, it already had to deal with a lot of even political factions, as Janet mentioned, were difficult. So unions have a history of trying to bring immigrants together, however messily it is, okay, but they have a commitment to it, okay. So I've been focusing more recently on what does it take to do that kind of activism, okay, in challenging and difficult circumstances. And of course, Suzanne and I will write a book about that. We'll interview Janet again. Okay, so part of it is coming here and meeting and talking with you. So I looked around and I said, well, how can we prepare? We have all these young people at ASU interested in social change, social justice. They're feminists, they're queer activists, they're organized around immigrant rights. 40% of our student body is Latino. They're organized around incarceration. They're organized around economic justice for low-wage workers. They're organizing around reproductive rights and justice, and they're young, okay? And they are ready to get out there, and they already are out there. They come to the classes with these experiences. Our Latino students, because their parents are undocumented or their parents are immigrant, they've been negotiating the state for quite some time before they come to college. They've been paying water bills, so they've been raising money to get somebody out of jail. They know how the state works, and they bring a lot of that tacit knowledge with them. So what I want them to leave the university with is a certain kind of hardiness for standing your ground in difficult times with people you don't necessarily agree with, okay? And that's just within our school, we don't all agree, okay? Let alone with the forces outside the school who would rather we went away. So I looked around for some leadership training models and got interested in a kind of new versions of leadership that kind of blend leadership and activism together. Okay, because union women had to be activists to claim the leadership structures to help them become leaders. Okay, so it's an interactive process. So transformational leadership is something, since I'm in the School of Social Transformation, that we developed to use to describe our leadership model. So transformational leadership involves the ability to inspire action, motivate change, and stimulate new thinking. But it happens on a personal level, an interpersonal level, and at a collective level. So it's like trying to create the capacities in individuals to be present, more focused, more aware of their environment, and to be more aware of their own biases, how situations might trigger their own emotional background, so that, you know, we want them to be able to accommodate difference, to acknowledge their own or become aware of their own biases, to be able to regulate, I hate that word, their own emotions, but you have to remember I'm with young people, right? Not that older people don't fly off the handle, but emotional self-regulation, which is like not reacting to you know, past tapes that tell you this is, you know, like just like when mom and dad argued at home, when somebody in your group just disagrees about a tactic. Okay, it's not mom and dad. It's not, you know, what the baggage you bring with you. And also to recognize, you know, interdependence, that we're all interdependent, that we can't really succeed, move forward, be human, to flourish without the understanding of how other people have helped you, how you have a responsibility to help them. And this is, of course, going to be important as we come to understanding how it is to be in alliances and coalitions with people that you might just agree with a little bit of something. You don't have to buy it wholeheartedly, but you have to be able to come together enough to achieve an impact. So how do you get there? How do you get this flexible thinking? How do you get this ability to control your emotions, to be more empathetic, to not shut down and run, to, you know, stand your ground in difficult moments? Well, I've turned to somatic education. Some of you may already have somatic practices like Tai Chi or yoga or movement of some sort. The one that I've been using, and I work with a colleague at ASU, is called Feldenkrais. Maybe, Suzanne, yes. Can you put it on the board over there?
Feldenkrais.
Spell it for people.
Yeah.
So Feldenkrais is a method that dancers use, athletes use, actors use it, and it's based on slowing down very small, minimal movements that are slowing down the automatic impulses that run through your body. It gives you some spaciousness so that you can feel how your body is responding to every situation that you're in, so that you can become aware that you need to step back, to perhaps take a pause, become more grounded. So I'm going to give you a little opportunity to experience Feldenkrais in a minute. So I'm not going to go and tell all of the secrets about it. Okay, so my Feldenkrais practitioner teaches a Feldenkrais course in the dance department. And then he and I teach a course called Transformational Leadership and Embodied Activism in my School of Social Transformation. So we get students who are interested in social justice issue from anywhere on campus. We have students in the School of Sustainability that are interested in environmental justice, but they can't, they're scientists and engineers, and they're having a hard time explaining to people what climate change is, okay? And so like they want to take a course like this to learn how to listen to, you know, the public, how to present your ideas in a way that can be accepted by other people and not call them, you know, stupid. You know, what do you mean you don't understand climate change? You know, every scientist in the world, you know, says that it's happening. And of course now we have a president who just doesn't believe that, and so is undoing all of the legislation. So we get the students and we do, the course is set up so that there's a Feldenkrais lesson, there's a small mindfulness activity, there's simulations to give people a chance to experience some real life conflicts they might encounter at a union meeting or on a demo or wherever their area is. And then they keep a journal, we do a lot of, you know, it's still an academic course, so there's articles they read about the neuroscience of leadership, about the role of mindfulness, about the body and movement, and how that relates to helping you become a whole person. Okay, so it's like it's about developing a whole person approach to activism, where the body and the mind and the spirit are all integrated. They're not separate. Okay, and that the body can actually give you good feedback and knowledge. Plus, the body is a source of pleasure and comfort, and it's a source of pain. And I only turned to this because I had sciatica pain, okay? Right when I became the director of this big, complicated, messy school, I got this out of nowhere, like excruciating back pain. I said, I didn't even do anything physical. What caused this? So the stress was causing me to hold my body in a certain kind of way. And so I tried all the conventional, all the unconventional, and then Feldenkrais worked for me in terms of allowing me to be in my body without experiencing that pain, because I found new ways to carry my body that distributed the effort over the body so that I wasn't holding on in certain areas. Everybody has some point, and it might be the back of your neck. All of us spend a lot of time at the computer, so there's certain areas that we habitually use over and over. What Feldenkrais does as a method is it allows you to, your brain, whether you're aware of it or not, it's allowing your brain to experience movement in a non-habitual way so that you can, over time, come to see that, in my case, I realized if I could sit in a certain way, it elongated my back and the pressure was no longer on the lower back. But to remind myself, sit up straight. I mean, your mother's been telling you that forever, you know. So no, that didn't work. But the practice of Feldenkrais retrained me so that if I forget and experience a twinge in the lower back, then I know how to move my body forward in a certain way that alleviates that stress. That's how it works for me. I learned little techniques that I could use under the table, rocking my hand in a certain way that it reminded me to create more spaciousness, to listen deeper, and not to overreact. And in my position, I had lots of difficult and challenging conversations, some of which had to do with race and class and disability, because we're in a social justice space, but yet students would experience homophobia in the School of Social Transformation. And they go, you hear that in the union too, right? You know, yeah. What? There's sexism in the union, there's homophobia in universities, you know, there's discrimination against people with disabilities. And I'm like, wait, I'm your friend, you know, like I'm gay, I said like, this is like, I'm not trying to do that. So, but I got defensive, all right, because I didn't want to hear that. And I had to learn how to pull back, how to listen, how to try to understand their perspective. The course has been modified to teach to Pueblo leaders in New Mexico, and my collaborator and I taught 2 different cohorts of Pueblo Indians who are pursuing a PhD degree in justice studies. They're already leaders in their communities, so some are lawyers, some are community organizers, some are healthcare workers, and they are suffering from, you know, the pain of historical discrimination and injury, and so like that's a part of what they bring to the table. And then we've modified the curriculum so that we deliver it in seminars, we deliver it in retreats for organizations and agencies, particularly ones oriented towards social justice, where we come in and work with people around this particular methodology.